Hey guys, welcome. I'm here to tell you about how I made these concrete countertops in my kitchen. You can follow this process to make just about any concrete countertop, whether it has a sink or not, or even if you want to stain the countertop afterwards. The forming process, the pouring process, all that stuff is pretty much the same. The only difference would be, use whatever color and then you could stain it afterwards or whatever. I'll have some other videos coming about some different ways to stain in the future, so I hope you will hit the subscribe button and let me know what you think.
Alright, the first thing you're going to want to do when making concrete countertops is, of course, figure out the depth of your countertops. If you're doing an island versus a bathroom or a kitchen, it's going to matter. So make sure you measure that and leave enough overhang. Your doors and drawers are generally 3/4 inch outside your cabinet face, so you make sure your countertops stick out a little bit further. I usually do like 1.25 inches on my concrete countertops. I just like to look a little bit better. Feel free to do whatever you like. So once you get your measurements, you're going to want to get your 3/4 inch melamine. That's why I use as my forms. You can use some other stuff like plywood, but I highly suggest melamine because it will leave a perfect finish on the on the bottom side, and it's pretty easy to work with. So you take your melamine and you rip some edges down to fasten onto the side. You're going to rip those the thickness of your countertops plus 3/4 inch because they're going to fasten onto the side 3/4 inch melamine, and you're going to silicone those edges. It is very important that you silicone those edges because if water does protrude down between those edges and gets into the edge of the melamine, because the melamine is made out of particle board, it will actually expand a little bit and it can cause some issues in your countertop. That is especially important to keep in mind if you are doing an extended long countertop and you're having to butt two pieces of melamine together. Be very, very aware if you're doing that. Whenever you silicone all those edges, you're going to want to make sure you have something that'll leave a really nice, consistent finish all the way around. That way your edges all look nice and consistent. I've got some metal balls specifically for edging this, as you can see that's what I'm using here in this video, and those are really nice because I have various sizes so I can change it up, but the most important thing is that it does leave a consistent finish. Now once you do this, you'll have a little bit of silicone around on the outside of the spot that you're siliconing. Wait till it dries up and then you can come back and just peel it off with your finger for the most part and get that out of the way, because you're not going to want that there because it will cause an issue with your countertop, obviously. As you can see in this video, I am using forms. These are the hand chiseled edge forms. I will put the link to where I got them below. No affiliate. I do really like their products. That's also where I got the balls to do the edges. If you want to get fancy and use some tools like that, feel free. That is also where I got my sink mold, because I am obviously doing a concrete sink on this one. You can fasten the edges on with a finish nailer. I use like 1.5 inch or 2 inch finish nails, and that seems to do a really good job. Now once your silicone dries, you'll be able to go back and make sure everything's ready. I usually don't put a mold release on my melamine. However, you can, and it will make removing it from the form a little bit easier, but I've never had much trouble doing so. So that is kind of up to you. Next thing's kind of specific to this countertop, mainly because I'm doing a sink, is I wanted to get the sink in the perfect spot, so I had to measure and account for obviously the thickness of the concrete that's going to be on the sink, which is about 1.25 inches, and then I had to build a mold for my faucet. I wanted to leave a hole that is the size of the faucet that goes through the countertop, but then I also wanted to leave a spot that was big enough so that the ring on the thing would actually go on there, because these are 2-inch countertops, which most faucets are not made to fasten to 2-inch countertops, so you do have to have something counter set into that, and that is why I used the blue foam and kind of taped up the edges and stuck it down, and seemed to do a great job. Had no issues whatsoever. That is a really great way to put holes or something in your countertops if you need to, is to get some foam, cut it, put it in there. That's also how I form up for a sink, is I get that 3/4 inch blue foam, cut it the size of the sink, take two pieces, stick them together, tape around the edge, so we have a nice edge, set it in there, and then you pour concrete around it, pop it out once you're done, and you have a nice hole where you can set your sink in. Once you get your form all set and your silicone's all dried up and you're just about ready to start pouring concrete, you're going to want to make sure you get some reinforcement. I use 6-inch square wire. This seems to do a really good job. It's easy to cut, easy to work with. I don't use rebar because rebar is kind of thick, and the wire just does a really good job at covering the entire thing. As you can see in this video, for my sink, I built a little cage, which was rather cumbersome, but if you're not doing a sink, then that doesn't really matter, so I'm not going to talk about that very much. But you're going to want to take that 6-inch wire, make sure it does cover the entire countertop, and once you get some of your concrete in there, most of your concrete in there, you can take it, set it back in there, which we'll get to here shortly. Once you're ready to start doing concrete, you do have some options as far as concrete. I have made countertops with regular Quikrete concrete, ProFinish 5000 Encounter concrete mix is what I'm actually using in this video. It has a much higher PSI, which means it is a much stronger concrete, but is also considerably more expensive. However, the white variant of this concrete is very white. If you do want like a pure white countertop, I do highly suggest Encounter because it's the only one I've found that is actually white. Quikrete does have a tint base concrete countertop mix that is white, and I have kind of started using that more because it is considerably cheaper and gets a little bit more of that antique white look, just a little bit of an off-white. I love the way it looks really good. I've done it, I've used it quite a few times, but this Encounter is super pure, and as you'll see, that's why I was actually putting a little bit of orange dye in it, because it antiquens it up just a little bit, just enough to get the look that I was really going for with these countertops, because I did not want the pure white look, because my cabinets are a little bit of an off-white, and this actually turned out pretty good. I love the color of the countertops and the way it turned out. So next thing, whenever we're just about ready to pour the concrete, as you can tell on this particular countertop, it is the black inside the white, and that is kind of an interesting look and kind of difficult to get. I've tried replicating it with stain, with black, like water-based stain. I don't really like stains, acetone-based stains, because they do kind of set on the concrete. They don't really soak into it that much, and so if you were to ever somehow get a chip or something, which I'm not too worried about with the way I do these because I cover them in epoxy as well, that is something to keep in mind. The entire concrete is actually dyed. Like, all of the colorant is in the concrete, so if you were to chisel this thing in half, you would still see that color, you know, kind of going into the countertop some. And the reason why is because I took some gray concrete and took some black dye. The dye that I used is the Encounter concrete dye, and I mixed it really heavy. You take your dry concrete, you put a bunch of that dye in there, mix it up until it's dry, but it's black. It's turned from gray to black, so it's very dense with dye, but still kind of dry like powder. And you take that and you sprinkle it over your countertop to create whatever shape it is you want to create. Once you do that, you're ready to mix up your white concrete, and you'll take your white concrete, and one thing that I want to be very clear about is you do not want to just dump it, because if you dump it, you will get kind of a splashing effect on the countertop, and in my opinion, it doesn't look very good. If you like it, that's fine. You may want to experiment a little bit before you make an entire countertop like this, but you're going to want to shovel it and kind of set it on there, especially over that black. That way it doesn't wash away and it kind of stays in the same look that you have created. And one reason you want to use the dye is because there is so much dye in that, and when you pour that white concrete over it, some of that dye is actually going to bleed over into that white concrete, and that actually gives some of the fading effect that you see on this countertop and a couple of the other countertops that I showed in the beginning. That's actually where that comes from. So it's a really cool effect. I like working with the dye for that reason. You could probably do it with some different color dyes and kind of get a similar transition effect. I love the way it turned out. I'm super happy with it. Just make sure that you do kind of set the concrete on there, kind of pack it down around it, that way it doesn't move, and then you can kind of pour the rest of it. Once you get your concrete all kind of poured in there, make sure you check the ratio on how much water you're supposed to be using on whatever countertop mix that you are using, because every countertop mix will be a little bit different. You can make it a little bit thicker, a little bit runnier, kind of like somewhere in between. If you're doing a big countertop that's all solid color or something and it's easy to pour in there, you can do that. I usually make these a little bit drier because I intentionally leave holes that is kind of part of the strategy. Is I don't want it to completely fill and get a perfect surface on the bottom, because I'm going to come back and fill it, and I want to leave some holes to be filled with some black grout, basically. That way you kind of have that look of, I don't want to say granite, but it's the look I'm going for, basically. So once you get your concrete, you're going to want to make sure you finish the bottom side really well, because obviously the bottom side is going to be the side that sets on your countertop, because you're going to flip it over. So make sure you go across it, get it all nice and smooth. Try finishing it. Do a good job finishing it, especially if your cabinets are level like they should be. That way it will set on there nice, flat, and not have any issues. Once your concrete's set up and you're ready to pop the forms off, have at it. Go take them off. If you put them on with screws, just unscrew it. Should be able to pop it off without much of an issue and get all your molds off. One issue I did have with this countertop was getting that sink mold out. I absolutely did not use enough mold release. I have actually used this sink mold a few more times since, and I haven't quite had the same issue, because I do apply the mold release very liberally, and that has made a pretty considerable difference. I ended up having to kind of get a jack and just put a little bit of weight on it and let the weight of the concrete countertop fall out of the sink mold. Honestly, took like an hour or so to let it do that. Make sure that if you're doing something like that, that you do put a lot of mold release. So once we get our countertop unformed, we're going to want to flip it over and take a look, see what it looks like. In this particular countertop, I have wanted to leave some space so I can come back and fill it. I actually use the Encounter. They have a mix that's very fine, basically like a Portland cement, but they do have it in white and gray that actually matches their concrete. So I got some of that and mixed it up, and you do literally just grout it on. Once you mix it, you take a float, smear it on there, let it dry up a little bit. You can come back and sand it. And one thing I did is I kind of went over it with white and black, kind of alternating. Went over it kind of with black first, especially over all those spots out in the middle where there are holes that I wanted to be there, like I mentioned before. Get those filled. That way when you go over it with white, those don't get filled. And then once you get that, sand it down. Then there'll probably be some spots where you may want to come back, put a little bit of white on it, sand it down. I usually do that 2 or 3 times whenever I do countertops like this, and that seems to get me to a pretty good spot. Just do it until you're happy and you've got it smooth. If you're doing the, putting epoxy on it like I do, you don't really need to worry about necessarily it being level and flush everywhere. You are going to want to make sure you fill pinholes, because those little pinholes will release air and come up through your epoxy, and that can create some issues, to say the least. And once you've done all that, you are ready to pour the epoxy. The epoxy is the final step for your concrete countertops. It is the coat that will keep them from ever getting stained or anything like that. It is food safe, very important, and then you can put a urethane coat on the top of that. I will be doing another video covering the entire epoxy process, so make sure you guys hit the subscribe button and come back and check out my videos later. I would greatly appreciate it if you guys found this helpful. Hope that you would share it and give it an upvote. I would really appreciate that, and I will be catching you guys on the next video. Later.